2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to episode 29 of the PuckPedia Hockey Show. Today we have on founder of the Will Sports Group, recurring guest on the PuckPedia Hockey Show. It's Ian Pulver. Ian gives us a lot of good insight on the Olympics that just happened over the last couple of weeks from the agent's perspective of things and how the condensed schedule is making an impact on a lot of the thoughts and decisions that teams, players, agents all have to go through at this time. So we get Ian's viewpoint on that. We also talk about the upcoming trade deadline in a week and a half and how Ian's able to navigate a lot of the information coming out from all different angles now in this current day and age of media, and how he communicates that information to his clients and how he works around everything that's going on and keeping the clients happy and everything that's important with that. We also touch on the MLB situation with their potential lockout looming with the implementation of no salary cap. And so Ian was formerly an NHLPA counsel, so we get his view on that, and he gives us a lot of good insight on what the MLB can do to kind of help with the parity in that league. And then we wrap it up with a couple of his clients. We talk about Tyler Seguin, who unfortunately tore his ACL this season, and just how he navigates, players in their low situations, but then also a player like Beckett Sennecke, who's having a breakout year with the Anaheim Ducks, and how he's able to kind of navigate that as well. Make sure you're also subscribed to our YouTube page to get all these videos on a weekly basis. Subscribe, set alerts, all that good stuff. But without further ado, let's drop the puck. We now welcome on a very special guest. It's a recurring guest on the PuckPedia Hockey Show. It's player agent Ian Pulver, founder of the Will Sports Group. Ian, how's it going today?
Good. How are you doing, Keith?
I'm great. Thank you for asking. And we wanted to have you on now as the Olympics kind of wrapped up now. Great 2 weeks for both the players, the fans, maybe not so much on the management side of things. We saw an unfortunate injury to Kevin Fiala that is looking like a season ender for him. But I did want to talk to you just about kind of everything that happened over the last 2 weeks, what your thoughts were on NHL's participation, first time in, since 2014, as we got best on best in 12 years, and just wanted to get your overall thoughts on everything and how it played out.
Yeah, well, it was very interesting. I mean, it was I guess a perfect ending for the NHL, the NHLPA, the IOC, and the IIHF to have Canada play the United States in the gold medal game. So I tip my hat off that everything fell into place. The knockout rounds certainly were exciting, with the quarterfinal matchups and then the semis and what happened in the Finland Canada game. So everything fell into place, and it appears like they hit a home run. But it wasn't without everybody being a little bit nervous about it. So from a hockey spectacle, it looked great. And so Olympics came off well.
I think so too. The Olympics were great, and like you mentioned, it was kind of a best case scenario for the NHL and the NHLPA, getting USA versus Canada in the gold medal match, the two favorites at the beginning of the tournament that features high end quality NHL talent. Now that we're kind of back now, so
That's
the
right.
Olympics is over. This will be coming out on Wednesday here. That'll be the first day back where NHL resumes play. I wanted to get your thoughts as, and the agent side of things, and in terms of the scheduling, right? So this year we have a pretty condensed schedule. We had a 3-week Olympic break. So before and after the Olympics, have to squeeze all 82 NHL games in there. And then you have players who are in the Olympics who are playing 4, 5, 6 games over there as well. A lot of travel back and forth. So what are your kind of thoughts on the schedule and how that's going to impact, your players and injuries and just everything in general on the schedule?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that ties into the Olympics. This dates back for me almost over 30 years from my work at the NHL Players Association. I've always had a heightened awareness on player safety. And I can say without certainty, I have a lot of cause for concern, especially this year with the Olympic schedule. Last year was the little I think they called it a Four Nations. In 2 years, it's the World Cup. I know that it's caught the attention of the NHLPA. Whether it's late or not, it's never too late. And, I have grave concerns over it. We lost Fiala at the Olympics. Rantanen appears to be injured, I've read. And we can't go past the Olympics without talking a little bit about Sidney Crosby too. Felt bad for him. These were Sid's games, as we want to call it, or some may call it, and for him not to play and get injured and not be present for the semifinals and finals, you got to feel for him a little bit. Is that wear and tear of the regular season schedule? He was having a phenomenal year this year, and the Penguins were exceeding all expectations in large due part to Sid's success. And then he goes into the Olympics and he gets hit. Is that from fatigue? Is that from being out of position? I don't know, but I do feel badly for him. But that should raise everybody's antennas up. When you're cramming 82 games into 192 days with a 3-week break, does it hurt the NHL product? We're going to see 27 games come out for some teams in less than 54 days here. They're going to be playing every other night to the finish line here. And I think that, there are a lot of teams in contention for playoffs. So it's going to be make for a really interesting scenario. I don't believe we've ever seen this. So the next, 6 weeks is going to be exciting, but hopefully it won't be too taxing on the players. Yes, they did get rest, but with travel and game schedules, my antenna's up, and I hope the players are safe and the fans get to see a great product. It will be interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I think player safety is the top priority, especially for someone in your position. I'm curious now if you're advising a client heading into the Olympics, how you weigh pride and legacy representing their country against injury risk, contract status, long term earning potential. Has that calculus changed over time, or is that still kind of the same, like you mentioned, over the last 30 years that you've been in the business?
Players are gonna go to the Olympics. There's no convincing them otherwise. This is what they wanted. This was what was bargained for. There was a long hiatus of not going to the Olympics, so no question in my mind they're all going. Having said that, they have to be even more attuned to their bodies than ever before throughout the entire season, especially, coming out of the Olympic break, so on and so forth. So you can't counsel them against it. I do feel, though, that these compressed schedules may clearly impact career longevity going forward. As we add more games, there's going to be 84 games going forward, and there's only so many days that you can play, NHL hockey. I do believe they are going to shorten the exhibition seasons, but that may or may not impact too. So there's a lot to learn, and I'm only hoping that the NHL and the NHLPA, puts player, safety first, and everybody is aware of it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point that next season they'll shift from 82 games to 84 games. And we were talking about this last week. I think I was talking about it with Hart, how it's hard with the NHL. Like you kind of are in a world where the more games is kind of makes each regular season game mean a little less. And you're looking at some of the sports that are successful, like the NFL. They have, 16, 17 game seasons where every game matters. And we'll see how it plays out with the NHL. But at the end of the day, we know that revenue drives this sport, especially ticket sales. And 2 extra games is more revenue for the leagues, for the owners. So we understand the logic behind why they wanted to add that in. Does that make your job a little challenging when you have players who have signed long-term contracts under the assumption that they were playing 82 regular season games instead of 84 regular season games?
No, I don't think that will impact the players in terms of I think the wear and tear in the schedule, it will impact the players a little bit more if there's not enough rest and recovery, and depending on the compression of the schedule. But it's not really going to impact our jobs. It may impact teams and how they utilize players and how they utilize their minor league players and recalls and cap management, no doubt. But from an agent perspective, it won't really impact our jobs.
Yeah, hopefully we don't get too many load management situations like you're seeing in the NBA right now, but it's understandable given how much wear and tear a long season could play on the players' bodies. Let us shift gears a little bit here, Ian. We have the trade deadline coming up in about a week and a half's time. March 6th, Friday, is the trade deadline this year. I would love to hear your perspective inside deadline week. Kind of what's the sequence of events? Are you seeing things from, insiders like Elliot Friedman, Darren Dreger posting stuff on X? Are you already having these conversations with GMs for maybe some players who might be on the trade block? How do you kind of react and manage when these reports are kind of coming out? There's a lot of different avenues of people getting information these days.
Yeah, it's like reading the stock market. That's our job, is to be watching what we're reading, what's out there, listening to what's out there, believing some of it, not believing other parts of it. There's a lot of rumors. The insiders will throw things out that aren't real sometimes. But most of the time they have their finger on the pulse, and they're good information sources. Having said that, it's our job year round to kind of have a feel for what's happening with each teams. There are teams that are easier to read than others, but it's always moving and through the whole year. And so, as you get closer and closer, things can happen or not. So, I know it's not. I'm giving you a general description of what we do, but I guess the long and short of it is to try and keep our finger on the pulse and know what's happening in the industry, so we can inform and educate our players and speak to teams when necessary. Every case is different. Sometimes teams do give agents permission to speak to other teams about their players, and sometimes teams do not want that, and they don't want us to interfere. So a very fine line, but those that are kind of involved in it know how to do it, and everything usually works itself out.
Yeah, we've seen some situations this year where teams are willing to let the agents reach out to teams and negotiate a deal on their behalf, trying to find trade partners and reasonable return packages for the teams involved, especially when players have a lot of control over the situation, whether that's through a no move clause or a modified no trade clause. How is some of the conversations go with your clients at these times of years, especially when there's a lot of uncertainty involved? There's emotions. Certain players have families, and it's difficult sometimes for them to uproot their lives. Like, how do you kind of deal all of that, especially like it gets so chaotic at this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, every client's different, and some are bothered by it, or more aware of it, more attuned to it than others. So it all depends on, the contract situation, the player's family situation, whether they like it where they're at. Some things are totally not in their control, and that is why the players should get paid as much money as they possibly can, because it's hard to uproot a family. It's hard for a player to move. It's hard to just leave a city. So, those are things: injury, player movement, player trade. These are the reasons why the players should be paid as much money as they possibly can earn, and career longevity. We talked about, the trade deadline, the schedule. All these things are impact people, their psyches. who they are, where they're at, and it all attaches to players or entertainers. And when you get traded, if you don't have a no trade, you got to go if you want to earn your money. And you should be earning as much money as you possibly can because your career is not as long as you may think it is. And so the fans should appreciate that and respect it. Management should understand it. And that's just the way, you know, the business works.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point where you're talking about that you want the players to maximize the amount of money they can earn for obvious reasons, shorten careers, and you really only have a certain window to really maximize the revenue. But there are certain situations where players do take a little bit less money to play in a certain place that they want, given certain, structure in their contract, trade protections, etc. How do you advise clients when that's happening if they're offered to take a little less than their market value? And given these trade protections, and then a few years down the line on a long-term deal, they're asked to waive those protections that they were given in their contract and took less money for. Like, how do you balance that? Because that's a challenging one, and we've seen some situations play out this season where that's been the case.
Yeah, when you drape it underneath the salary cap when they are already taking less than what they're worth, and then they're asked to take a little less. Hopefully it's gonna work out, but we have to advise clients that, it may not work out. And, the general manager may not be around who we negotiate a contract with and we believe and trust. He may lose his job, that's beyond his control. And so all these things come into play. And the player eventually looks at what his savings are, where he is in his career, and he's ready and willing and able to take that risk. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, and then you cross that bridge when you get there. But our job is to educate, inform, so that the player can make educated decisions and do the best he can under the circumstance.
Yeah, totally agree. And we'll see how it all plays out, not just with your clients, but the entire NHL. The trade deadline is coming up on March 6th. It's an exciting times for fans, but for the players, I would say it's less exciting, kind of a little anxious times. And just, once it's over, then they know where they'll be for the rest of the season at least. So provides a little clarity from that perspective. Let us shift gears slightly a little bit here, too. I know you were talking about the salary cap a little bit. And I want to talk to you about the MLB situation that's happening right now. So the Los Angeles Dodgers are basically spending as much money as they want to acquire basically the best players in all of baseball. It's created an imbalance in terms of the talent across teams. There are other teams on the other end of the scale who are refusing to spend money up to a certain amount and are really kind of being low spenders and not necessarily trying to win, but remain profitable as an organization. So I want to talk to you about the growing noise in the potential MLB work stoppage tied to the salary cap debate. From your perspective as a former NHLPA counsel, what are some of the key pressure points when the leagues and the unions clash over this cost uncertainty?
Well, I mean, from the player's perspective, clearly it's solidarity and making sure that all the players are on board and understand the history, understand where they're at and where they're going moving forward. They just had a regime change in the MLBPA internally. Tony Clark resigned, and Bruce Meyer, who formerly was at the NHL Players Association, is now the, I believe, interim executive director. That's all communication, education, and standing together as a unit. And, they're going to be up against the Major League Baseball owners, and they're going to have to determine what's most important and what they're willing to sacrifice. I was involved in three. Situations: a 1992 strike, a 1994 lockout, and a 2004 lockout wherein the whole entire season was canceled. And the players stood together for a full year and didn't want a salary cap in the National Hockey League. The one thing that we do know, and I believe Chris Bassett was former Blue Jay pitcher, was quite vocal. I think he's with Baltimore now. Last week was that a salary cap will not necessarily take down the Dodgers. And if you look at the salary cap in hockey, I believe either Florida Panthers or Tampa Bay Lightning have been in the conference championships for the last 10 years or more or less, but for a long time. It seems like the Kansas City Chiefs and they're around the Super Bowl or close there too, or the New England Patriots, all the time, right? And so you look this past year, the Blue Jays made it to the finals. The Milwaukee Brewers have been competitive with low payrolls over the last several years or more. And so in the NBA, the same thing, the whether it's the Lakers or the Heat, there seems to be player teams that dominate in salary cap. So to Bassett's point, I don't believe salary caps create parity. In fact, you could argue otherwise. It comes down to management and players and, putting good teams together.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point you bring up there, right, is, and we have this large discourse in the NHL that state tax has a big impact on, players' take-home pay, and there are certain players willing to take less money to go to these places. But you mentioned a couple teams like the Dodgers, for example. They're in California. They have one of the highest state taxes in the U.S. Among these teams, and then similarly, the Lakers and the NBA side also have a super high state tax. So it's not talked about in those sports as much because I guess, like you mentioned, Florida and Tampa have been the teams that have made it to the conference finals this year, but it's not strictly the state tax that's driving that. It's management, it's how they construct their teams and how they build around the outside staff too. And so I think to my question is like, if it's not the salary cap, like what would maybe introduce some parity in the sport of baseball where you see in the NHL now, there's a lot of parity. You're seeing teams kind of in and out, whether I know, like you mentioned, there's teams that have made the conference finals over and over again, but you're seeing a lot of new playoff teams. And this year, a team like Buffalo's finally getting in the mix there. So there's parity throughout the NHL. How do you kind of get that maybe going over to the MLB side of things?
I mean, I guess the Dodgers have built this super team, but maybe stronger revenue share amongst the owners, can create that. But really, it comes down to management, and like the Jays came out of nowhere last year, and so I think a lot of it comes down to management and player selection and creating cultures and environments that the players want to go to and have success with. And that with revenue share may be the answer, but one thing I do know is that putting a limit on what players are worth and for the players to take less money doesn't necessarily create greater parity. If you watch hockey and basketball and football.
Yeah, and I think one thing the NHL CBA introduced this year was no deferrals on pay starting in the upcoming season, and I think that's a big issue with the Dodgers right now, where Shohei Ohtani has 68 million of his 70 million annual salary deferred to maybe when he's living in a more advantageous tax state. So that's
Right.
maybe another wrinkle that could factor in here. Well, Ian, this has been awesome. Let us wrap it up here. We'll be, we're bringing a segment is brought to you by CoolBet. Stay cool and bet responsibly. If you go to puckpedia.com/coolbet, you can get in on the action today. I want to wrap it up here talking about a couple of players and clients that you represent kind of on different ends of the spectrum here. Let's first talk about Tyler Seguin, who is in a really, really solid year with a very good team in the Dallas Stars. And then he unfortunately got injured, tore his ACL. He'll probably be out for the remainder of the season here. How difficult is that situation to manage with your client, as a guy who's probably on the back nine of his career, has already, won a Stanley Cup and had a really, really successful career, but gets an injury that's tough to deal with and just emotionally tolling. And I'm just curious, like, how as an agent do you kind of play a role in that situation and try to manage everything for the player?
Yeah, I mean, Tyler is, I believe he just turned 34 years old, and he's a warrior. He just hit his thousand game mark this year. He's gone through these things, and yeah, it's tough to see. He's a throwback. He wants to compete, and he has great support system structure around him, his family. The people he works with off the ice, and he's working to get back on the ice, whether it's this year or next year, and he wants to compete. So yeah, it's tough to see that. I mean, and we provide support, but he's older, and like I said, great support staff, but it takes a toll on the player for sure. Yeah, and you're bothered by it as an agent because you want great success for a player like that and all your players. Whether, we have a player, Ethan Cardwell, who just had surgery in the AHL. He's played a little in the NHL. Whatever injury it is, the agent lives it and feels it, and, wants to support so that the players come back and rehab and do well. And you have empathy for those situations, and so you hope for the best and do whatever is necessary to support your players in their return to play.
Yeah, I think we want to talk about always like the highs of these situations, but there are lows that players go through as well. And it's
For
interesting to
sure,
hear.
that's another reason why the players need to be paid, and the fans have to understand what they go through with their bodies, and then they live with that for the rest of their lives. And whether you have plates in your body, you have reconstruction in your body, whether you've had multiple injuries, you walk around for the rest of your career, and you're constantly reminded that you were a professional athlete, and you need to be compensated for it.
Exactly. And we're all wishing Tyler a speedy recovery. Hopefully he makes a full return and is able to get after it, whether that be at the end of this season or starting next season with a full healthy training camp and recovery. One more client I did want to touch on here on the opposite end of the spectrum is rookie Beckett Sennecke of the Anaheim Ducks. He's having himself a breakout season, 44 points in 56 games this year on a resurgent Anaheim Ducks team, a real strong youth movement there. They're hovering around a playoff spot right now. Why don't you talk us through Beckett's kind of career arc and journey and navigating that? He was third overall in the draft at the Sphere a couple years ago, and now he's kind of taken over as almost a point per game player on a really good Anaheim team this season, and seems to have a really bright future ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, for the fans out there, if you haven't seen the highlights of him getting drafted at the Sphere, I mean, that will always go down in draft folklore, or however you may want to call it. But Beckett is a wonderful personality, loves the game of hockey, loves being at the rink, loves being around the players, and just plays, and he's slowly figuring out how to play at a really, really high level. And he did that in his junior career, and he's transitioned as a 19-year-old into the National League. It's been supported by great veterans in Anaheim, and also other young players. So there's a great environment there, and so he's been able to figure things out. He's wily, he's smart, he's got great hockey sense. He's a long-bodied player that, doesn't shy away from, traffic, and the sky's the limit for Beckett. And he loves the game. He loves being around the rink, and he loves being around the fans. He's a great personality.
Yeah, he seems like a great guy, and he'd be more into the Calder conversation this year if it wasn't for Matthew Schaefer. But it's great to see, and like you mentioned, I think the environment is a big piece of that as a young player who's developing. Like, how do you kind of manage that when maybe some clients aren't in an ideal scenario for development purposes? Like you mentioned, Beckett's kind of surrounded by a good group of veterans and young players, so it's a perfect environment for him to thrive, and he's given every opportunity by the Anaheim coaching staff to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, every situation's different, every personality's different, coaches are different, team management's different. So yeah, sometimes players, spin their wheels. Carter Verhaeghe spun his wheels for years, and so like then it becomes, a battle of perseverance and, kind of not getting distracted on what you can't control and playing the game for the love of the game, getting better every day, training hard in the summer and sticking with it, and Carter's story is a great story. He went to the East Coast Hockey League twice, and there were days where it was like, what am I doing? And it was never, he never blamed anybody. He always kind of like, hey, Carter, stay in your lane. If you love the game, go dominate the coast, go dominate the AHL. Carter led the American Hockey League in scoring, and so everywhere he went, he mastered a level, and then he went into the NHL, and then he became a fourth liner in Tampa, and a role player in Tampa, and was part of the Cup in the COVID year in Edmonton, and then he found his way to Florida and, kind of jumped on some opportunity in Florida. And then, all of a sudden, he's won multiple cups and, he's a star. So, I mean, it's not all for the most part, most guys don't step into the league and shoot the lights out. They have to go the hard way. And, then it comes down to, their psyche and how they're gonna handle all the obstacles in the way and their challenges. And Carter figured it out. Justin Brazeau's another one, figured it out. You know, East Coast Hockey League, AHL, no NHL deals, right? Providence Bruin, made it to Boston, traded to Minnesota, and has found a great home in Pittsburgh at an older age. Another player who just stuck with it. Those players, the Brazos, the Goodrows, Barkley Goodrow, never NHL drafted, but figured it out and made careers for themselves. So it's wonderful to be a player. It's wonderful at any level. It provides a good living. But there are a lot of challenges out there, and it's important to keep it together and find people that will give them good guidance and advice and go for it.
Yeah, and that's all you can do as an agent. And no path is linear. Everyone kind of takes a different route to get there. And I think you bring up a good point with Justin Brazeau. Has a great situation this year in Pittsburgh and is really taking advantage of every opportunity he's been given there. So it's really great to see. And, Ian, we thank you so much for the time here. Good luck to your clients as they approach the trade deadline. Everyone at the Will Sports Group. Any final words before we wrap it up here?
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for the chat, and let's do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Ian, and have a good rest of your week and good luck with the rest of the NHL season as we approach the off season in a few months.
PuckPedia.com.